Joining us on the podcast from Bear Insider, his name is Jim McGill. Jim, how are you? How's everything down in the Berkeley area?
Doing great here. Wish I could be covering a team that was a little bit more successful early in the season, but other than that, no complaints.
Well, I've been very interested, I think I'll say, about the lack of success around Cal so far in this non-conference. I was one of the people that was very bullish on this Golden Bear team going into the season. It's that weird period of time, right, where everybody is high on everybody's teams. There's so much excitement around fall camp. You've got Chase Garbers saying, you know, the offense is finally getting it together. There's a mentality around the team that feels different. Kwani Deng is saying that this defense feels like it's one of the better units that they've had in a while. And then all of a sudden you enter that Nevada game and things get a little screwy. At 1-2 through the non-conference, as a guy that's regularly covering the program, what's been the macro view about what's gone right and what's gone wrong here for this Cal team?
I'd have to say I'm pretty surprised too. The defense has been real solid ever since Justin Wilcox came to the program. They didn't lose too much talent in the offseason. They lost Cameron Bynum, who was one of their key DBs. Ziade Johnson was a pretty solid defensive end. They lost Jay Curhan, starting right tackle. But really, overall, all things considered, they didn't lose a lot of starting talent. They have a lot of good young depth. I expected the offense to be a lot more capable coming into the season than they had been in the last couple of years. And after stalling in the second half of the Nevada game, they've proven to be pretty solid on offense, strong enough on offense to give them a good season. The real surprise is the defense, particularly the pass coverage up the middle. They've not been able to get off the field on third and long situations repeatedly. I mean, get them off the field once or twice, 3 times in 2 games, and they could well be 3-0. I mean, the margin between the wins and the losses in these games has been pretty small. So they really need to tighten things up on their defense, particularly with their middle linebackers dropping into coverage. And they've got some young DBs that have surpassed some of their more experienced cornerbacks, and those guys have talent, but you know, they need to gain confidence and trust themselves to play defense, and rather than just guarding their man, going for the ball too. It's just, they've got some things they need to fine tune. I think they have the personnel to do it, but it'll be interesting to see if it actually happens.
So I'll start on the optimistic side, and then I guess we'll kind of flip it as we go. Offensively, this is not historically under Justin Wilcox been the strongest unit. You know, I think the running joke up to this point was probably if he could win games 13-7, that would be completely fine by him. But getting a guy like Bill Musgrave in as the offensive coordinator last year, you know, you can't even train in your own facility, let alone get a proper install in because of COVID. So you end up now with a full spring ball, full fall camp. It seems like offensively, this unit's much more cohesive than they were last year. Is that a function of the right talent being developed in, or is that just more the Occam's razor of you had more time with a new coordinator and you could get the system and figure it out a little bit more than you were able to with things in such flux last year?
The answer is C, all of the above. The Musgrave offense was bare bones last year. They had a rotating cast of characters at offensive line because so many were out with COVID. And even when they were back, the defensive line as a whole unit was out with COVID. So it was a really frustrating year where they couldn't get uncorked, but now they're able to run their normal offense. You wouldn't know it looking at the Nevada game because Garbers would not throw downfield. I don't know why he was gun shy being a 5th-year senior, but you know, once he got past that, the TCU game and the Sac State game, they've opened up the offense. They've added some nice talent to the mix. I especially like Jeremiah Hunter. He's a guy that probably would have started as a freshman sooner than later, but he got injured and missed the whole 4-game season. Trayvon Clark is a guy that had to step away from the team for a while too with family concerns, and he's back and has been super productive at receiver. The tight ends are deep. They've got a lot of guys who can do a lot of damage, and that's not even counting Terry, who's their big high 4-star tight end recruit, who will probably get worked in later this year too. The offensive line, you know, they've got 7 guys they trust that have good playing experience, and they've been working together a little while now, and they're coming together nicely. The running back core is super deep. I really like Damien Moore. He's a future NFL guy, redshirt freshman who shined a lot in the 2 games that he played last year in the shortened season. But behind him, they've got a lot of good running backs too, where they can rotate freely and not see a drop off. I think that the running back averages yards per carry, I think Moore is 5.8. Chris Brooks is 6.8. And let's see, their other Brooks running back is 10.75 per carry on his 8 carries. So, they've got a lot of different options to go to. And I think the offense will be fine this year. I've said from the beginning, they need to be top half of the league. And with Garbers seemingly back to his old self, I think he's capable enough to lead them offensively. I really do think this is a defensive question at this point, which is funny. Who would have ever thought coming into the season that the defense is the key to salvaging the season and having a pretty good year.
To the offense and that running back core in particular, is that something you see as more of a committee approach kind of going forward? Because, they got really nice production out of Moore these last couple of weeks, but it hasn't necessarily seemed like they've gone with one bell cow 20 plus carry type of back, unless I have been looking at the stats wrong for the first 3 weeks. It seems like they've been sharing it around at least a decent amount. Is that what we can expect going forward?
I think so. I think you can call this sort of a modified committee approach. Moore is the number 1 guy. He's going to get more carries than the others in almost any circumstance unless he's hurt. But they're not going to be shy about mixing in the 2 Brookses. They both have a lot of talent, and they have a little bit different skill sets that get them on the field. Chris Brooks is a big bruising back who is very good catching the ball out of the backfield. And the other Brooks is a guy that is pretty versatile, and he's a little bit different type of running back than either of the other 2. So he's a change of pace guy. And Marcel Dancy is a guy that'll get mixed in there sometimes too, with short passes and a few carries too. He was the hero of the UW game 2 years ago when he scored 2 second half touchdowns to almost handedly win that game for them. So I wouldn't count him out either. And even behind them, they've got a couple of good guys too. They're deep.
They offensively seem like they stepped up their recruiting a lot in the last couple of years. I think about that 2020 class, especially that, had Sturdivant. I think Kai Milliner as quarterback was in that class. Like a lot of 4-star guys at some of those outside skill positions. Is that something you're starting to see maybe a little bit more bubble up among maybe like sophomore, junior guys that came in right as it seemed like they were making an effort to really up the talent on that side of the ball? And then for, guys like that senior group, how much have they developed in the last year between, I guess we can maybe throw the pandemic season out and say compared to their last full season in 2019 to where they are now?
Well, it's interesting when you're talking about receivers, there's sort of a gap between the experienced guys and the young guys. Mm-hmm. The 2020 guys, there's 5 receivers in that group. And I think all of them are certainly really capable of making their mark at Cal. Sturdivant's had an injury, and he's had a cast on his hand. And even with his cast, he's played really well in practice. He's an elite receiver. Hunter is another elite guy too, a future NFL guy, almost for certain. I really like Baker, who's a quick guy in the slot playing behind Remigio. He got a couple of balls this last week, and I expect to see his workload increase. I love Tommy Christakos, a 6'4" receiver who is built like a light tight end, but he's a guy that is a big red zone threat, but they've had success throwing deep to him in camp too, where I think he's going to be a really good weapon. And then Aiden Lee's the 5th guy, or actually the 4th guy, really big 6'3", 235 linebacker body receiver who is able to create some mismatches and do some nice things out there. And then Mason Mangum's another slot guy that is really fast, one of the fastest guys on the team, but it's a numbers game right now. So he's probably going to have limited opportunities. He may be phased into the return game sooner than later because he's got some good return skills too. A lot of the young offensive line, Ben Coleman's a guy in that same class who may end up being the best lineman in the group. He is the son of an NFL lineman who is probably the most physical guy out there. McCade Mattower is another one of the young offensive linemen that got thrown in right away, and he's probably a future NFL guy. Man, the backs, I mean, Damien Moore came out on fire right away, and his classmate, Chris Street's a guy that we're not hearing about yet just because there's only so many snaps available, but another guy who has shown well in camp, who probably has a good future there too. And behind Garbers, you've got a guy that you don't hear too much about, Zach Johnson, but he was going into camp as the backup, but Ryan Glover, a grad transfer that came in, made his mark really fast. So he looks like he's the primary guy right now, but Johnson's looked good in spring and fall. And then Kai Milner, as you mentioned, a new freshman from the 21 class, he's a guy that's really athletic and very mobile and has a lot of arm talent and very intelligent kid. So I think they're building some nice depth at quarterback, even though it's kind of unproven right now. So yeah, those recruiting classes on offense were key. They really needed an injection of talent on the offensive side of the ball, and they've really developed some nice depth and a lot of different skill sets that can suit them well. And Musgrave has a lot of tools in his toolbox to play with in years to come.
How much has Chase Garbers developed just since last year, to now? It seems, from what I gathered talking to him at Pac-12 Media Day, it already seemed, the way he intimated, that he was already more comfortable in Musgrave's offense, that being able to spend spring ball learning that playbook a little better had done a lot of good for him, and it seems like it has. I think back, he had a couple of throws in that Sacramento State game where one is like, he's kind of on the run and just kind of moonshots like a Russell Wilson, almost deep ball that he hits a receiver with deep for a touchdown. I think it was in the third or fourth quarter. And there's just these little glimpses you get out of him where you're like, okay, I can see top third of the Pac-12 as a quarterback kind of skill and talent from him. Is he made a jump, or has he made a jump through 3 games that signals that this is a breakout year for him in the Pac-12?
That's a funny question. It depends on when you ask. If you would have asked after the first week, the answer would have been a firm no. He looked like a true freshman out there. He was just, It was inexplicable how he just wouldn't trust his guys to throw down the field. It was like he was scared to death of throwing an interception. That did not look like a guy who was comfortable in the offense. But, in spring and in fall, he did look much more comfortable. He moved the ball really well. He guided the team well. Against TCU, I think he had a pretty solid game. He completed some nice down the field passes. His pass percentage was fine. Pretty much the same against Sac State. I think when he is not afraid to run with the ball, when the situation presents itself to keep the defense more honest, he's at his best. But, there were a couple balls too, especially in the second half against Sac State, where he just threw it straight into the ground. And people were like, what are we looking at here? This is the same guy that completed these great down the field passes early on, and some good mid-range stuff, good sideline stuff. So he needs to clean up that type of situation. And talk to Mike Pulowski, who's the Cal Color guy, and he does a podcast with us weekly. And he said, one of the issues was he's sometimes when he's on the run, he's not setting his feet and he's throwing off, and he's just not getting the right leverage. And those are the kinds of things that a 5th-year starter has got to clean up. And I'm sure they'll be working with it quite a bit in practice. And, if you see those momentary lapses eliminated from his game, yeah, he could be a top third of the league quarterback the way that he's played the last couple of weeks.
It's funny when you think about it, Cal is dependent, at least in this non-con, on, what week you're talking about them, right? Like on our college football show, we were saying after week 1, this is the same old Cal we're talking about, with the same, anemic offense and the same type of issues that have plagued them for years now. Then week 2 and 3 kind of come around, and all of a sudden the eyebrow sort of raises, and you're like, well, wait a minute. The issues might be on the other side of the field here all of a sudden for the first time. And it very much seems that way, as you had mentioned right at the start here. Kwani Deng's status. He was doubtful, I believe, last week, kind of picked up an injury in that TCU game. What has his status been this week, and what's it going to be going forward? Do you know?
The game time decision right now. I don't think he's at 100% health. He might be healthy enough to be able to contribute a bit, but they're taking it day by day. It's a situation where he's not clearly out and he's not clearly 100% enough to be clearly in. So yeah, that's a to be determined situation.
what is a loss like his do, being, kind of an anchor point in that defense?
Well, I think the leadership angle is probably where it hurts the most. He's one of the more vocal and experienced guys out there, and they definitely miss that. They've got some good talent behind him in Braxton Croto and Marcus Bimage, who have done a pretty nice job in his stead. And Oren Patu typically backs up Cam Good on the other side, but he's capable of swinging over and filling in some of those reps too. I really think it's the leadership element the most. I think they can get the production from the other guys, but you having that fifth or sixth year senior out there who's really gotten it done, it's hard to replace that.
So let's dive into the secondary and kind of the issues that are occurring back there. You mentioned that this is a secondary that has lost a couple of good pieces over the last couple of years, but for a defense that has prided itself on kind of just reloading and taking that talent and just plugging guys in that back end, it's completely fine year over year. And all of a sudden we're starting to see the slippage through 3 weeks, and those 2 losses. What is the slippage? I mean, where do you think it's coming from in that secondary, and where do they need to work the most to get it fixed up before they enter conference play here this weekend?
Well, they really only lost Cam Bynum from the last class of DBs. He's a guy that started for 4 years, and I think that his loss is affecting them more deeply than people thought was going to happen. His replacement was supposed to be Chigozie Anuzium, who's a guy that got a decent amount of playing time as a primary backup at cornerback, and he's built like an NFL guy, but performance, the consistency just hasn't been there, and not just this year, but he's been beaten too many times. I think he would tell you the same thing in prior years too. So they have been mixing in a couple of freshmen, a true freshman in Lou Hearns and a redshirt freshman in Gamble. And those guys are still a bit green. Their coverage skills seem to be pretty good. They make the right read most of the time, but until they trust themselves to play the ball, they've been playing the man a little bit too much. And when you don't look back, you're going to get PIs. You're going to get guys that, if they're athletic enough, they're going to make good plays even when you're tight in coverage. And they've got to tighten that up too. I think Hearns, the true freshman, is really capable of that. I saw him play in high school, and he was a very good receiver too. So he brings that offensive mindset to the defensive backfield. If he can tighten it up and make plays on the ball, I think he's going to be a guy that can make an impact even this year. Gamble, I didn't see as much of in high school, so I don't know what his capabilities are. But if he's able to jump some guys ahead of him in seniority and be able to get out there and get playing time, I think he's probably shown pretty well in practice. So those guys really need to tighten it up. I like the safeties. Hicks and Scott are both seniors that have seen a ton of action, and they're pretty consistent for the most part. But the coverage issues seem to be related mostly to the corners and to the middle linebackers dropping back in pass coverage.
Does that give you pause, considering this Washington team that is coming in this weekend basically showed a very different set of looks offensively in that Arkansas State game? A lot more spread, a lot more willingness to throw the ball and let Dylan Morris kind of flash his arm a little bit. Jalen Mcmillan went for 175 and a touchdown. Does this feel like it's maybe a little worrisome, considering that they let Sacramento State, kind of throw all over him? And I know it's Troy Taylor. I know he kind of has a bit of familiarity with Justin Wilcox and knowing what that defensive system is, but this is a Pac-12 team with a lot of talent that's coming in, and it just, I don't know. Can you talk me off the ledge of this feeling like a real matchup nightmare for Cal here?
Well, honestly, until they prove otherwise, I think every game is a concern going forward in Pac-12 play. I don't know that Washington presents the type of matchups that they're incapable of dealing with. I mean, I think they've brought stronger teams into the Cal games really in the last few years, and Cal's won 2 of the last 3. I think, it'll be interesting to see what kind of Washington team shows up, because it's kind of a deal with Cal because they stunk against Montana, and Michigan, they were pretty competitive in the first half and pretty terrible in the second half. Which Washington team is going to show up? I mean, I don't think they're going to be a prolific offensive team. They scored a lot of points against Arkansas State, but I really don't expect that in Pac-12 play. But yeah, until they tighten up those coverage issues, you have to be concerned every game. It's a matter of what kind of corrections can this coaching staff make? What kind of adjustments can they make? What tweaks can they bring to the table? And how can they get their guys to make the next step that they need to be able to get the job done? Because if there's too many lapses in pass coverage, they're going to have a hard time against anybody they face.
Is this a unit that feels losing Tim DeRuyter?
It's an interesting question too. A lot of people question that. Really, this was Sermon's defense last year. DeRuyter didn't play a big role in the game planning. It is a collaborative effort, but this was Sermon's defense last year. There was talk that the defense had gotten too predictable under him and they needed to bring some different looks and different ideas in. I don't know. Maybe that was a party line. Maybe they are suffering from not having DeRuyter there. It's hard to say. I think we're going to need to see a little bit more time this season to have a better idea. But, one of the things you have to consider is DeRuyter was playing with just top middle linebackers when he was the defensive coordinator. When you've got Evan Weaver there all 3 years and Jordan Kunishak, I mean, those guys were studs. So when you replace them with Tattersall and Iosefa, with guys that don't have a lot of playing experience, and ISF is really young, there's going to be a drop-off. You just don't want to see a drop-off like this. Just too much, right? And they've been pretty good in the run game for the most part. Passing game, they've got to get their act together.
So going through the rest of this Pac-12 schedule, the weird thing is that going into this year, I kind of figured that there would be 2 or 3 teams where there would be kind of variance of a rather extensive degree in terms of what their top end and bottom end was in Pac-12 play. Cal, to me, is one of probably the 3 teams as of right now where I see the most potential for variance in the conference schedule. Are they someone who maybe they're trending toward that top end of the variance, or do you think that they're trending more toward the bottom, right toward the middle, in between? Where do they project out as a guy that's there every day the rest of this conference season?
Going into the season, seeing them extensively in the spring ball and in fall camp, I legit thought that they were in position to be able to challenge Oregon for the Pac-12 North. Yeah, I can't right now. I mean, Oregon State is a team that continues to get better. Stanford looked like they were terrible on offense against Kansas State, but now that they've chosen their starting quarterback, they've made a good decision. I think they're going to be more of a threat than I thought they were going to be. Washington State seems to be a little bit of a mess. Washington is another TBD too, which is the team that we're going to see going forward, the team that got their act together against a pretty crappy FCS team last week, or are they the team that's prone to lapses like they were the first 2 weeks? I think, the door is open for them, but really until you get some consistency on defense, we're just not going to know for sure.
The last one I got for you before I let you go, there's games I feel every year, maybe 1 or 2 or 3, where it kind of lays bare. It's like this is who you really are type of game for a football team. And I don't know if Cal's gotten one of those yet. The TCU game in hindsight may prove to be one such matchup, but I feel like because we still don't know a lot about Washington, this one might not be it either. Is there any game on the conference schedule that you kind of see projecting out and go, whatever this Cal team might be this year, this matchup right here might be the one where it's kind of distilled, like the year is kind of distilled into a game? Do you see a matchup there that is either a make or break or something that will be more instructive by the time the season's over?
I think that would probably be the Oregon State game. They're a team that's trending up, and their running game is developed really nicely. I mean, continue to be a strong running game. They're the type of team that Cal really has to beat if they're going to really do anything. Cal's just got more. They flat out got more talent than Oregon State does, and they've got to be able to beat a capable team that's not as talented as them and do it consistently. They lost on a couple of awful special teams gaffes last year in Corvallis. They can't have those kinds of lapses. I think that would probably be the team that would be one of the good measuring sticks. I think the UW game, if it were played a little bit later in the season, would be another good measuring stick too, because I think their talent is fairly comparable, and I think that they're similar in a lot of ways. So that would have been a good one. I think it still will be an interesting way to gauge, but again, neither team has played up to their potential yet, so we really don't know who either team is right now, like you said.
Jim McGill, Bears Insider. Where can we find the work and where can we find you on social media?
BearInsider.com is our web address, and my Twitter handle is BearInsider_com.
Jim, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Glad to be with you.